Hi, this is Corral at CorralFitland.com, and welcome, WYLCOME, WelcomeNetwork.com. And this is a video in which I'm not going to talk about anything in particular that are any of the works that I've done or any of the cards or books. What I want to talk about is language and why I think language is so important and why I feel that language, you cannot afford to neglect language and the language that you use when you're trying to communicate your ideas. Sometimes, I can remember when I was in high school, they made language, and I think they still do it today, seem like something so complicated, so complex, especially if you're talking about a language which is not your own, that only very smart, very intelligent people could learn it. I can remember that in my high school there were track systems, and there were people in first, second, third, and fourth. First being the very highest, that is the smartest students, and the fourth track being the dumbest. And that's the way it was. I shouldn't say dumbest, but that's the way it was, okay, the dumbest. And those in the first track were obligated, even if they did not want to, they were obligated to take Latin and French. Those in the second track were obligated to take Latin and Spanish. Those in the third track were not permitted to take a foreign language. Those in the fourth track, not only they weren't permitted to take a foreign language, they barely were allowed to take the English language. The way they were taught the English language, they were taught it in a very elementary way. And do you know they should have done just the opposite? Just the opposite. The students that they should have required to take, especially Latin, should have been those students, especially those students in the fourth track. Because those students somehow, somewhere got lost. Somehow they did not make the connection that the students in the first and second track made when it came to understanding, or when it comes, because this is the present tense, even today, when it comes to understanding English, the English language, and understanding that English has basically two parts to it. I'm being very general here, because the Germanic part is not just one, and the Latin part is not just one. When you talk about the Germanic, you're talking about the tree, the language tree. You're talking about the North Germanic, okay, which is Icelandic, Swedish, Danish, Norwegian. And then you're also talking about the West Germanic. And there you're talking about, on one side is High German, but you're also talking about Frisian, one of the languages closest to the English language, that's spoken in Holland now. It's a dialect now. I don't think it's considered a language. And then you're talking about Low Franconian, which eventually became Dutch. But you're also talking about, and that part of the language, most people who speak the language more or less get and understand, more or less. But if you wanted those students in the third and fourth track, but especially in the fourth track, to begin to understand English vocabulary and understand that part of English that somehow went over their heads, then you should have felt yourself obligated to give them Latin. Because then they would begin to see things about English, and certain things would begin to make sense. They would begin to say, so that's what where the word came from. The word active, or the word enchant, or the word, I can't think of any words right now, but the words that are basically Latin and come from the Latin and Greek part of the language versus the Germanic part. You should have obligated those students to take French, because English has a, excuse my French, as we say, has a hell of a lot of French words. It has a lot of Latin, but Latin comes through the French. Why? Well, because you had the Norman Conquest in 1066, but even before then, what was it, Edward the Confessor? He was, even though he was English, he was more Norman French than Norman French. Like some people say, she's more European than Europeans. He was surrounded by the French. This is before the Norman Conquest. This is like 1042. This is before the Norman Conquest. In his court, they spoke French, not English. Then you will begin to understand where certain words have come from the language, what parts of the language, and that English is a patchwork. But of course, the people in the third and fourth track, who were basically people of color, blacks, the few blacks that were there, Latinos, and poor whites, were relegated to classes in which they were taught, as they say, the most basic. But if you really wanted the students to understand language and to stop being afraid of language, if anybody should have been taught Latin and French, and maybe even Spanish, because language is just a mode of communication. That's all it is. It's a mode of communication. You don't have to be a genius to be able to speak another language. There are many people in the world, in South Africa, people who've never set foot in school can speak 4 or 5 languages. Africans who are considered, who've never had the opportunity to go to school, can still speak I don't know how many languages. And then the ones who've had the opportunity to go to school, okay, because let me just be clear on this. I do not consider the non-European languages of Africa, whether you're talking about Zulu, whether you're talking about Fulani, whether you're talking about Swahili, I do not consider them dialects. I consider them languages. And those persons from the different African countries, because Africa's a continent and not a country, but from those different African countries who've had the opportunity to go to school, and there's millions who've had the opportunity, not only do they know how to speak the different African languages in their regions of Africa, but they also learn how to speak Western languages. Many of them speak English many times better than English speakers, and French and Italian. So you meet people who can speak 5, 6, 7 different languages. Not because they're geniuses. I want to make sure I'm not at the time. Not because they're geniuses, but they understand if they go to this place or if they go with these people, they have to speak these languages. And all it really does is, and one of the things that it really does is enrich the vocabulary, enrich their understanding, enrich their worldview. Anyone, and I'll say this again before I finish, anyone can learn to speak their own language well and to speak another language or other languages just as well. This is Coralla Ficklin at CorallaFicklin.com and WelcomeNetwork.com.